Hi, so welcome and thank you all for joining us today. By way of an introduction, I'm Madeleine, co-founder of the Work Crowd. We're a global community of independents, so advisors, consultants, freelancers that work across the marketing mix. Our network works with clients globally to build reputation, drive revenue, and manage risk. We've built an award-winning digital marketplace that best supports our network by connecting businesses globally to the talent that they need, as well as enabling them to centrally manage their freelance and contract workforce. So I'm delighted today that we're joined by three incredible marketeers who make up our panel. So we really are in for a treat. So thank you for all those who tuned in. It's a bit of a dank British summer day. We're going to explore what the secret sauce is to scaling your business. So in terms of our panel, I'd like to welcome James, Diane and Gareth. So we'll be looking at what is brand, that startup gold dust that provides the tailwind to your marketing activities and the glue that keeps your customers returning. I do like everyone to sort of get involved. So there is at the bottom a chat box, so please do introduce yourself. Also, if you have any questions for the panel, there's a Q&A at the below. So please do ask lots of questions and we will set aside some time at the end to go over those. So let's kick off. James, you have extensive experience working with brands, and I understand your focus is on using creativity to help build a brand that both captivates and that really consumers adore. You're currently an advisor to Allo Web and Liquid Access, and I think you were previously part of a 4-person executive team and CMO to TradingView, and were instrumental in helping scale that business to an impressive 50 million users, and I think that they have today, and I think they operate in over 180 countries, if that's right. It'd be great to find out from you how you scaled that business and the challenges that you came across, and the advice that you would give our audience.
Sure, no problem. Hello, everyone. Yes, so I joined TradingView before the pandemic happened. And when I joined the company, which is a social platform for traders and investors, as well as a charting and analysis tool. So you can do all your analysis of different types of, whether it's cryptocurrencies or it's Forex or it's stocks, and understand which ones you want to buy or sell. They had an amazing product, but no brand. It was very utilitarian. It was very functional. And the problem, particularly as anybody who's had any experience of fintech will know, that financial technology businesses spend a lot of money on marketing and go for a very particular audience. And that means that there's very high costs involved. So when I came in as the chief marketing officer, it was looking at how do and especially when a lot of our focus was the US, how are we going to go after the likes of, Coinbase or JP Morgan or whoever with those budgets? And actually brand stood out as one of the ways that we could distinguish ourselves very, very quickly, make ourselves stand out and also differentiate ourselves. And building a brand that was spoke more like our customers. Most financial brands are very, very statesman-like, statesperson-like, and they have to be for a lot of reasons, but not least the regulator. But we had an advantage that we weren't managing money, so we could be a lot more loose with and fun with our tone of voice, and starting to figure out how can we differentiate ourselves using brand to acquire the customers. And this was at a time when the markets went crazy. Everybody was in GameStop, getting involved in GameStop, and there was a real appetite for someone who didn't, in the financial space, who didn't speak like a corporation and who genuinely meant it. They weren't just hopping on the bandwagon. And so that was the space that we developed with brand, and it goes through many different touch points, which I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit more detail. But yeah, that was the start of my journey, and we scaled it. The whole thing took off, and today TradingView has 50 million users. It's widely recognized as one of the most popular financial websites on the planet. And yeah, it's a great success story, and it's amazing that the product and the brand came together to create such a great business idea.
And just with that, James, obviously you've talked about standing out. Financial services, quite a dry, it's a dry space. So when you're there looking at that brand and bringing creativity, what do you mean by that? How do you create that differentiator? If you've got some example, some like tangible examples from when you were at TradingView or any of the other companies you worked with.
Yeah, well, I think it'd be good to start with how we constructed the brand, like why we chose the routes that we chose for the identity that became TradingView. And one of literally the first few weeks when I joined the business, it was trying to understand, well, what did these people want? What did the customers want in many different countries, over 180 plus countries. They even had a paying customer in Antarctica for a while. Like, all these people tuning in from all these different parts of the world are looking at this service and at buying this product. And why are they doing that? And we started to unpick that. Well, actually, yeah, it's about making money, but it's not just about making money. If you really wanted to make money, you could go get a second job, for instance, and that would, for many people, be a more guaranteed way of making the money. It was specifically about making money on their own terms, and they didn't want one manager, let alone two managers. And so actually, when you start to look at why people were trading and investing, it was this idea of freedom and liberty. And particularly as the US was a very important market, it was like, okay, well, actually, what we're doing here, we're looking at this idea of liberty. We're looking at a version of the American dream here, that anybody under their own skin, under their own power of their own two hands and own two feet can make it in the world. And so it's like, okay, that's a great starting point. Now, what do we do with that? That isn't just Lamborghinis and wads of cash and all the sort of cliche tropes which is the other extreme, right? Everybody's like, yeah, you can make tons of money, rich bling, like Hollywood. It's like that wasn't that either. Of course, someone has to ring the doorbell. 3 seconds. Sorry, 3 seconds. Ask another question and I'll get back to it. Sorry about that.
We'll put you on pause, James, and let's move then to you, Diane. So Dan, you are a fractional CMO. You're founder of your own business, Branding Matters. You've obviously had a huge amount of startup and scale-up experience from your time as startup lead at Microsoft and global CMO at Mass Challenge. And then I think, as well as Branding Matters, more recently, you've been CMO at Bliss being an audience-first advertising platform. So you've had a wealth of experience seeing businesses scale, and it'd be great to get from you really an understanding of tell us more about this, what you felt helped drive that success. And actually, just in mind that I think you were part of the team that helped take Bliss towards their private equity buyout. So I think a lot of businesses, when they're thinking about scale, they do have a goal in mind. So thinking about scale and reaching those goals.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Great to be here and having this conversation. So I think it's probably good to start, kind of frame things with my time at Bliss, because when I joined the company, they were already a scale up. They had international operations headquartered in the UK, but they had a US operation. They had offices in Asia Pacific and in Australia as well. And so when I joined, they had shortly before that received, a Series B/C funding round of about 27 million, which enabled them to hire a CMO and a CTO. So that was kind of their first move into really professionalizing in those areas where they had a marketing team in place, but it was there was no kind of a functioning CMO or marketing leader to really set strategy and help the company understand what marketing could really do and how a high-performing marketing team could help drive the business forward. So that was a big sea change at the company, and I think that's probably maybe a common experience in companies at that stage, because oftentimes companies at those earlier stages will hire either more junior marketeers or possibly even some more senior ones. But if there's nobody at that kind of upper level setting the strategy, then things can be quite disjointed. But I think, in terms of what I found there, and I think is again also common in other scale-ups, is that sometimes, when I came onto the executive team, for example, I found that there wasn't a consistent objective setting happening at the executive level, so that they could communicate clearly to the whole company what was the direction of travel. So I think the impact that that someone can have coming in as a CMO, goes beyond just the marketing realm, for example. So bringing in some discipline around objective setting and getting that clarity for everybody on the executive team, and making sure there's measurement in place and that we're communicating out to the company on a regular basis. How are we doing against that? So clear objective setting, and I think also focus, because there is a tendency to kind of get distracted by a lot of shiny things that are happening, and you've got client requests coming in and other priorities and things that are coming through, and focus is really hugely important, because you don't have endless resources, both financial and also from a team perspective. So that's really important. And then kind of pulling that down onto the brand level, kind of similar to the kinds of things that James was talking about, is really looking at, what is the brand about? I think Bliss in particular had a great reputation in the space that it's been operating in, especially in the UK, was quite a dominant player, but in other markets was more of an up and comer. And so really looking at, what is the value proposition? What is the message that we're trying to get out to the market? Developing those audience personas, really trying to drive a common understanding throughout the company of what it is that we're selling. And we also work to develop a brand architecture, which I often find is really important again at that stage. I saw it at Unruly as well. Oftentimes you have products and product naming that's grown kind of organically, even named by the engineering team. Sometimes you have repetitive product names. Probably Gareth and James, maybe you've seen this as well. I like to call it the Franken brand, where you've kind of got this mishmash of names and naming conventions. And so at that stage, I think it's really important to kind of look across the board, develop a consistent brand architecture, so that it's really easy for everybody to understand how everything fits into the business, and also how are you going to name things and look at things as the company grows and adds new product lines or service lines, etc. So I think that's really important. And then I think the last thing I'll say, because probably the list could go on, but the last thing I'll say is making sure that the marketing objectives are joined up and linked in with the business objectives, because I think sometimes that's not happening at that stage of company. And so the marketing team is kind of running off at the beck and call of sales, and kind of make this event and make me this one pager and these kinds of tasks, but there's no overarching strategy that says, okay, if these are overarching business goals, what are the marketing objectives that we need in order to help the business reach those milestones? And then how are we going to go and execute that? What are the tactics, both paid, owned, earned tactics that we're going to use and strategies that we're going to use to go and achieve those objectives? So making sure that is aligned is super important.
That's really interesting. And just I think on that note, actually when we had a discussion last week, we touched on the fact that I think for a lot of startups and scale-ups, lead generation, performance marketing as a route to scale there can be a real focus on that, I think, from founders and investors, because evidently there's a clear return on investment that can be tracked. It'd be great to get your thoughts in terms of, is that a good focus for scale for startups, or actually should they be prioritizing other marketing methods first?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of pressure, especially now from investors to really drive ROI and get that tangible return. So there is a mounting pressure on founders to kind of go out with that performance marketing, and I think that it's really important to have a balanced view, and to have that, we have a marketing mix for a reason. Those paid, owned, and earned strategies are going to be working best, in combination, and they can help each other. Sometimes it may depend on the type of brand. B2C brands tend to be potentially more focused and interested in growing brands and developing their brand story, whereas B2B companies may, and especially in SaaS businesses, may be much more have a much more performance bent. But I mean, I think it's super important to have an integrated approach, and obviously you can't do everything, so you're going to have to pick your battles or figure out dials to dial up and to dial down. But I mean, even if you look at that sort of seminal study by Les Binet and Peter Field, which is their latest kind of version of that, is called The Long and the Short of It, and they talk about this kind of long-term brand building versus short-term revenue driving, and their latest research, which is kind of a build on their 2007 study, which really has been I guess highly quoted whenever there's talk of this, which do we focus on brand building or short-term performance? And the new study kind of highlights that that performance campaigns, yeah, they can drive that short-term efficacy, but over the long term, the brand building is more effective. And so, they have to work hand in hand, because you can have maybe a succession of these short-term focus, drive ROI in the moment kind of campaigns, but their study shows that actually, while that might bring the short-term revenue targets, hit the short-term revenue targets, it may not help the company sustain and build for the longer term. So it is, I think it's difficult for scale-up founders and CEOs to sometimes get their head around that, because that instant gratification is kind of hard to argue with. But for the long term, that combination of brand building and ideally maybe a campaign or a set of campaigns that emanates from a core idea and storytelling that relates to the brand and what the business is trying to build, with performance activation, so you can have that kind of 1-2 punch of brand building plus performance activation is probably an ideal way to go.
I think it's really interesting, and I think thinking about that, Dan, and thinking about the long-term reputation building, Gareth, I think, given your background, you work very closely with brands in terms of building their reputations and engaging audiences. You very much have that integrated approach. You work across paid, earned, owned. So obviously have a good understanding of that marketing mix. I think currently you are head of integrated media at Golin. And before that, you were head of digital for Mike Worldwide. So you work with clients such as Shutterstock and Tidal and Whirl. So it'd be great to just get your take on that, what you've learned through your own experience, thinking about that mix of performance versus brand. And I think as Dan has mentioned, that that importance of storytelling, and really what you think brands should be thinking about when they scale.
Cool. No, and hello everyone. I mean, to be honest with you, I'll start. I mean, as you can see, I was nodding a lot to what Diane was saying, because I'm literally totally agreeing and may not to that, but I will give it a try. But I think based on my experiences, and particularly most recently, where I have been helping a couple of startups look to how they can scale through kind of digital marketing, there is that point, and I'm not sure whether or not Diane or James said it, but the word that popped up and I wrote it down was focus. And there is trying to understand, actually, if you're a business owner, solo business owner, entrepreneur, a founder with a small team, or even at that point where your business is either you're a startup or a scale up, you do face that question of like, well, how should I be spending my time? Where should I be focusing? And I have been having a lot of discussions with clients recently, particularly in this space when they're about growth, is how much should we focus on lead generation and how much should we focus on brand building? And I always think that if you're a startup and you are really looking to scale, your mindset, and I think Dan touched upon it, is growth. How can I grow quickly? How can I get as many leads into the business so that I can convert? And you know what? That is really, really important, and it is going to help you get to the next step. But what that doesn't take into consideration is that actually, you know, understanding where a lot of your prospects and customer database is in the journey. You know, are they top, middle, or bottom of funnel? And what should you be doing in order to kind of get them through? And I would always say that actually, and I'm saying this to a lot of clients now, is like really start focusing more on the brand building, because if you spend a lot of time on the brand building and getting your brand story right, but also how you talk to your customers and prospects, how you show that you understand what their pain points and challenges and how your organization is a solution, that will ultimately feed lead generation. You know, the way that I always look at it, and when I go into an organization and I try and help them grow and scale, it's like, okay, like I make the assumption that the majority of the time your customers aren't ready to buy. A small percentage of your customer database will be ready to convert, you know, bottom of the funnel. They know who you are, they understand the product, they've done the research and identified you as the perfect solution. But the rest of that audience that's there is in your funnel is very much net new or very green to your organization. So brand building in terms of communicating, you know, issues that are relevant to your customers or prospects, or talking about some of the broader challenges within the industry, it's going to ingratiate your organization and your brand to that individual, because you are showing that you understand what they're going through. And if you are a business going through that research and trying to identify a supplier that's going to fit your needs and can give you what you want, if someone's telling you that they get it and get what your challenges is, then of course they're going to be a really good fit for you. And ultimately that then helps people over time discover your brand, discover your organization, discover what you're offering. And when they're ready to buy, you'll be one of the first organizations that they reach out to. So it does feed one and the other. But I would also say, you know, if you've spent the time researching the market, researching your customers, and truly understanding their pain points, so you can create that broad awareness, that sort of insight is also really, really helpful further down the funnel as well. You know, when people are really looking to sign off and buy, they are at that point going, okay, I'm going to spend some money, I'm going to invest, I want to make sure that that business is right for me. And all of that insight really does help make that attachment between you and the customer. And so it is super useful. So the more that you focus on brand building, the more that it will feed lead generation over time.
That's really interesting. I think, so slightly taking a step back, because James had to go and answer the doorbell. But I think, obviously, we've talked about building your brand, thinking about brand for the long term, building your reputation. I think when a lot of, let's say, they're starting out, perhaps founders have got a brand, but you're trying to reinvigorate your brand, or you're looking to grow into new markets and you're thinking about how can my brand resonate in those markets. Now, going back to you, James, you talked about value and creativity. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, hopefully I won't be interrupted again. Sorry about that. So I think with any brand, when it comes to practically building it, you've got a bit, as you say, so or as Diane said, there's a bits of here, a team has built a bit of this and a bit of that, and it's kind of come up as a hodgepodge usually. So one of the first things I do when I'm advising is to look and take a step back, and it's great exercise is just to get a whole whiteboard and go, okay, right, let's run through a few key elements. First is the vision. Like, if we're successful at what we're going to want to do, how will the world be different? Will it be, hopefully it'll be a better place, but how will it be a better place? So like the vision is, we want to see a world that does X. The mission, which is the next statement, which is everybody goes on about their mission, and but it's very simply, how do we get to our vision? How do we help bring about the world that we want to see? And then the third point of that sort of top of the brand architecture that I usually run through is a slogan. It's like, how can you, in the shortest, most condensed form possible, communicate your mission and your vision in just a few words, like 2 words, 4 syllables, 5 syllables, 6 syllables, very, very short. Because that's the snappy bit, that's the bit that everybody struggles with when they're starting out, when they write a press release for the first time, and it's like company X, which does, and then they have to write 3 sentences to explain what they do, and nobody really gets it. And if you can't articulate it in that short, then the consumer is not going to remember it very well, unless you're having a huge sort of sales team that spends an inordinate amount of time communicating the value proposition. So if you build that and you get to a really good slogan, you've got a mission, you've got a vision, then you can start building out other elements as well, such as the brand persona. Brand archetypes are really much maligned in marketing, but I actually quite like them. This is the youngest, like there's only set roles in stories. The idea of someone that's a rebel brand, or someone that's a magician brand. It's a little bit. Some people consider it outdated, but it's quite good to just play. What is the ballpark that we're here? Are we funny? Or are we mission driven? Are we here to overthrow the established authority? Not literally, not politically, but you know what I mean. And you start to work down, and then you go, okay, well, what does that mean from our tone of voice? How do we communicate? What does that mean to our visual look and aesthetic? There's no point being a rebel brand that's out to disrupt the status quo, and then you're colored navy blue and you've got like a royal crest sort of visual aesthetic. It doesn't really gel. You can start building the pieces together, and a whiteboard is really, really good place to start this. And what you end up doing is coming up with a brand narrative booklet, which says, this is how we use photos, this is how we speak, this is how, and you may need help developing like the aesthetics or the logo, etc. if you want to go to those steps. It doesn't have to all be done at once. It's just, you iteratively work towards it till all of a sudden you've got a very holistic and cohesive brand identity. And then you can start to have fun. So that's what we did with TradingView. As I was saying before the doorbell went, we focused on this idea of liberty, but not Lamborghinis. And ultimately that became an aesthetic that was quite American, Nike-esque, very clean sans serif fonts, a tone that was quite irreverent and countercultural in a world that was in a world where our consumer didn't really want managers. We would poke fun at the managers or the banking system, not overtly, but just in the way that we acted. We acted as if we were things didn't really matter. Like, life's too short, get over it, sort of. None of this sort of faux hype or like faux, like we really believe it. We're trying to aim for a cool vibe, I guess. And then we partnered with brand ambassadors like Alex Honnold, who's an amazing free climber, Leah Holding, who's a British explorer and adventurer, and Kate Zelliff, who's a skier, who's an amazing skier in America. And to epitomize this idea of calculated risk and calculated rewards, like you have to do your research, you have to prepare, but you also have to commit, which is what most people wouldn't say, that you can't. Most people will say, oh, only if you want to, and we will say, no, actually a life lived on the sidelines isn't as good as a life that gets stuck in, even if you make mistakes. And that was the sort of the bold bit that started to resonate, and that ultimately derived the slogan, which is this idea of look first, then leap. And that became our philosophy that came through from the brand ambassadors, through the tone of voice, and that started to work really well. And then that gave us that sort of irreverent nature, gave us a huge remit of creativity to play with in terms of creating talk triggers, which was most successful in merchandise. Actually, we made some very specialist merchandise, such as like tarot cards, for instance. So people are predicting the future in trading or investing. They want to know which stock's going to go up and which stock's going to go down. Tarot cards is a very old-fashioned way of trying to do that, and we sort of slightly poked fun at ourselves, but at the same time made these tarot cards where everything was focused on trading terminology, and they went off like wildfire, and everybody started to post them on socials and share them with friends and talk about them. And what we did was we activated our social audience to communicate with their social group, with who were likely to be our customers as well. The people who use our platform are likely to know TradingView's platform, are likely to know people who would want to use TradingView's platform. So it expanded the talk about TradingView, and word of mouth marketing is one of the most effective ways of marketing. If someone says, oh, I need a new tire, who do I go with? And they go, oh, well, go to this shop. Then you're more likely to go there than if you're served by an ad. So that's one example of how we started to, through knowing exactly what our identity was and how to appeal to the sort of innate drives of the consumer, through to creating a brand persona, through to actually activating it through a specific activation. In this case, it was merchandise, to get our consumers talking to one another. Like that's many steps down the line, but that sort of work can come through in many different ways. It's not just merchandise. That core essence of what the consumer will resonate, like what will resonate with the consumer, can go through paid advertising. It can go through out of home. It can go through YouTube channels. Like it can go across all your touch points. Content can go everywhere. You just need to know it and develop it and have a cohesive strategy for it.
No, thanks, James. I mean, it's hard. It's understanding your audience. Dan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say I really like the methodology that you laid out, James, and I was going to say that my experience is that sometimes coming into companies at this kind of early and scaling stage, they often they haven't taken the time to focus on vision and mission and those kind of foundational building blocks, and some people think it's a bit fluffy or just words on a page, and I really think it is important because it coalesces the leadership team around what is important. What do they want to be when they grow up, kind of thing. What's the impact they want to make on the world, and what are the things they need to do? The mission. What are the things they need to achieve in the next year, 5 years, whatever that time frame mission of the time frame of the mission is. But I think it's super important because then you can start to align everybody in the business behind that. And oftentimes, if that doesn't exist, again, you kind of can lack that focus. And just to say, when I was at Bliss, when I first came, a lot of people talked about the culture and the kind of the culture of the brand, and I was trying to kind of get under the skin of what that was. And everyone said, "Oh, it's a good culture," but I didn't know what that meant and how they defined that, because how we defined that and how we thought about the personality of the brand, I thought was really important. About, again, kind of like what James was saying, are we funny? Are we irreverent? What's the, how do we act and how do we look? And so we did a kind of a global, I called it sort of a hackathon, where in each of the offices we put up stuff on the walls where everybody could, it was kind of like, if our brand is, it was a bit of fun, if our brand was a car, what kind of car would it be? And we had a couple of prompts, and we just had everybody from all the offices putting stickies up on the wall and adding their ideas and thoughts, and we had pictures sent in, and then we compiled it all, and we used that to build the brand personality. And it meant that everybody could participate, and then from that we derived the tone of voice, and we kind of had this sliding scale of kind of serious to more casual and open to closed, and these kind of different levers. And that's how we developed that. And it was really nice because everybody felt that they had contributed, and they really had buy-in, which is important, because otherwise sometimes these things can just become some dusty words that sit in your brand book. So it's nice to be able to engage the team across the company and bring that to life. So that was worth mentioning.
No, it's interesting. I think there's just two questions that spring to mind from what you've said, James, and likewise you, Dan. So I'll start with the first, which is, when you're thinking about that brand and you're thinking about your vision and mission and who you are in terms of your identity, so what's going to align with your audience? Obviously, when we're thinking then also about scale, we're thinking about potentially new audiences, new markets. So how do you align the two, that you remain focused, but at the same time you enable or activate that growth into new markets? I don't know who would like to answer this one. Maybe Gareth. We'll oh, James. Okay.
Sure, Gareth can do it if he wants. So I think there's a couple of ways into this. One is to work backwards from your product. What does your product actually solve? Because at the end of the day, that is the most that will be applicable to everybody who buys the product. If you're fairly certain that you've got a good product and that there's a good market fit, and you've seen that in one territory and you need to roll it out into other territories or expand it further, then knowing the essence of what the product does, let's say it makes someone's life easier, like just top line, most generic idea. You can build a brand on a brand identity that life should be easy. And that would seamlessly fit into from the product to the brand. So you can sort of make these logical leaps about the areas that you want to play with. The second sort of way to focus in is with obviously data and customer research, and to look at what customers say or how they act with the product, or what they do in general. I did a very extensive survey before we did the sort of a new American dream brand identity, looking at, do these concepts of freedom and liberty actually translate to international markets? Because TradingView was in 180 plus countries, and it did, with the exception of Japan, which it didn't for some reason. So that's a learning there. Maybe don't do it in that way for Japan. So you can get some way with customer research, although I think a big mistake that a lot of people do is to use customer research as okay, now tell me what to build. Customer, tell me what to build. It's not quite that granular. It doesn't quite work in that way, because everybody has lots of different ideas, and it can lead you into this chase of, oh, with this brand or this brand. You kind of want to use it to aid your thinking, in addition to that logical steps from what does the product do that is actually working. And I think the other point within this whole idea, and it's a really important step in this exercise of forming a brand, is to understand there's one thing, as Dan says, that everybody pull it together, and that's really important to get everybody on the same page. But it's a really good exercise as well of educating everybody about where you don't want to play. Because if you all sit together and then you build the brand that is exactly the same as your main competitor, then you're going to have a real difficulty when it comes to marketing. Even if it's direct performance, you're going to have to then end up competing on price, which is always very difficult and very liable to change because someone else just reduces their price. So you understand through those exercises of vision and mission how you as a company, how you as a culture, how you as a product, and you as a brand are different from others. And that differentiation is really important, because that gives you a space to play, which means that you're creative, and when you go to market, you'll get more noticed. If many people, especially when they're starting out, many startups will use the same digital channels. They'll try paid search, and they'll try a bit of Meta, and they'll try TikTok nowadays. But if you know how you're different, and you can start to extrapolate on that, then your creative all of a sudden becomes a lot more standout, and that starts to aid your performance. Even if it is performance marketing as opposed to just pure brand, it's still going to be more effective if you know how to be different from all the others. So I think there's a couple of areas. There's three or so areas within that idea of forming a brand and how to make sure it's effective. But that's where I would start when I'm starting my journey in terms of like formulating where we're going to go and what we need to communicate.
I think that Gareth.
I think I was just going to add to that, because I just want to kind of point, just based on my experience, and I've done this with a lot of organizations, having that brand, defining what your brand narrative and what your brand story is really important, regardless of whether you're engaging with kind of warm or hot prospects or even net new audiences that have just discovered you. Because I think if you're communicating, regardless of what channel, something that's true to your narrative and what you stand for, and more often than not, that is a lot of who the kind of founder or kind of leader or business owner is. They do bring a lot of flavor into the brand narrative, because their business is an extension of who they are as a person. But I also think it should be reflective of the audiences that you want to engage with. I used to do a lot of work with brands in terms of helping them establish a narrative so that they could be in a lot of different places online, be that through social, paid search, on their websites, whatever that digital touch point was. And it was like, how can you ensure that you are telling a consistent story about yourself, no matter where you are and no matter who you're talking to? Because audiences will attach themselves to that. as just as much as they will the product or service that you're selling. So if you can find something that does resonate with audiences, and you do a lot of that, to James' point, you do a lot of that kind of research and planning up front, like what do we want to be known for, and amongst what audiences, and even like how would we want people to talk about us when they see a piece of content, or have a kind of engage with us across one of our multitude of touch points. It's like, what do they want to come away with? And if you can really land on that very early on, it does help you as you go along and then start to scale out, because you can be, as long as you stay true to it, it gives you enough flex to adapt slightly. You know, like for example, I did work for Fairy Liquid years ago, and this is really random in terms of their positioning, but what the brand didn't realize actually is that Fairy Liquid is just not a washing up liquid to a lot of their users. It's used in so many different ways. People use it for so many different instances around the house, that it was almost like, you know, that's actually one of the most powerful things about your brand. It's not what you believe it to be, it's what people believe it to be too. And if you can mash the two together, you're going to have something that is going to really engage people and draw them into your business.
Interesting. And just, we've talked a little bit about, well, actually going back to that question that I had at one point, which was, Dan, you touched on culture and the importance of culture, and actually engaging with your employees to help actually define what your vision and mission is, and that in turn helps then define your culture and all of that good stuff. There's obviously more to scaling than just marketing. And I think just you talking about that, I wanted, because actually you think about culture and you think about actually the people that make up the business and the importance of that. So just reflecting on your own experience, what else do businesses need to be thinking about when they scale?
Yeah, I mean, in culture is a really important point, because, you know, I think it was it the founder of HubSpot who I heard speak once, and he said that culture is how people talk about you when you're not in the room. And I really like that, because, you know, that applies to your team as well as people externally. You know, how do people think about and talk about and describe the business? And so if you can get everybody pointed in the same direction and you know, sharing the same messages and having that common ethos around values and what's important. And I think values are also, you know, an sometimes overlooked kind of piece of that company culture. Again, something that I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just something that sits on the shelf. You know, you make it and then you make them and then you roll them out and then nothing happens. And so I think, you know, for me, it's very much about, you know, embedding those cultures, those values into the culture and bringing them to life, whether that's through awards or whether that's through, you know, talking about them, you know, on a regular basis in those company town halls, or embedding them into the recruiting process. Actually, Unruly did that really, really well in terms of how they embedded the where I was the CMO for about 10 months doing a mat cover, and we were really good at embedding their values into the recruiting process. And that was super impressive. They had a section of their recruitment process where they actually, I think about 24 hours before your interview, your second round interview, where you were presenting something back, they would call people and say, listen, we want you to do I forget exactly how they were. Oh, it was that deliver wow was one of their values, and you had to come up with something that you would do in the interview. You had 1 minute to deliver wow, and it could be anything. I taught everyone how to make an origami bird, and told a story while doing it. So people seemed more impressed that I could multitask and tell the story while I was building the bird, which, you know, actually, oddly enough, was very, very closely aligned with my kind of skills and abilities in my job. But in any case, that was really great at kind of seeing how, you know, how people could think on their feet and, you know, really be ready to deliver something that was unique and be creative and that kind of thing. But they, interestingly, I think they adjusted that assignment for the engineers because that was going to totally put off, for example, that particular audience group in terms of recruiting. So in any case, so culture is super important. And how do you build that? How do you build out the values? And how do you communicate that and keep that alive and as a living thing within the company? I'd say that that's super important. And I think we've touched on many of the other things. Probably maybe one other thing I'd suggest that hasn't been touched on is around that kind of agile mindset and that agility. I think it's really important to, pick a course of action. You've decided your focus, your plan, your objectives, and you've developed your strategy, you're testing things out. This is once you've got your brand alignment and all the things that James and Gareth were just talking about. But and you're trying things out. But I think it's important to test and learn as you go, because sometimes you chart a course and actually something isn't working. And I think there is maybe sometimes can be a tendency to stick with a course of action because that's what you've decided to do. But I think it's important to make sure you give that idea or that tactic enough time to breathe and show whether it can work. But I think it's important to have that agile mindset and say, okay, if this isn't working, it's time to realign. And I mean, at Bliss, for example, we as because it was in the advertising ad tech space, there were big impacts coming from the privacy changes happening with Apple ATT launch in 2021 and the deprecation of the third-party cookie, which is coming from Google eventually next year, and so we had to do a lot of kind of floating with where, keeping on where the market was going and kind of putting our stake in the ground on how we felt we could be positioned and capture attention and be different and differentiated in that backdrop, but also making sure we had room to maneuver if things, if we needed to. So I think that's important. Be agile and ready to change as market conditions change. It could be a pandemic, it could be something else, economic conditions that happen.
I think you're absolutely right. Founders, business leaders do need to have that agility to adapt and evolve. And just going back to the culture from a recruitment point of view, what you've said, James, in terms of actually value and mission, and then you, Diane, in terms of actually that leading through to culture. We talked about obviously scale and acquiring new customers, but obviously when we're scaling, we also need to hire amazing teams, and they do all link in, because actually if you've got that strong value and culture, it does make it, from a recruiter perspective, it does make it so much easier to hire people into the organization, which ultimately are going to be the backbone for your scale. We have got some time for some Q&A, so we've got a few people who have asked some questions. If there's any more, do let us know. So Zadhir has asked, what is the cost-effective models of promoting a new product? So this is thinking about a small and medium-sized business. So I think a lot of founders evidently struggle with what to prioritize. So he's discussing customer, product, branding, market demand, competition, and what qualities should a small business entrepreneur should search for in terms of different potential. Okay, let's ask the first question first. I think it's thinking about budget. Small, medium-sized businesses have a limited budget, and then thinking about where we should prioritize that budget. Who would, Gareth?
I mean, I can start here because that's something I have been doing a lot most recently and through the work crowd is with a couple of small startups. I mean, I think for me, and it sounds old school, but I think having a really good, solid database and being able to do some email marketing is always going to be very quick, off the mark, easy to develop and kind of deploy, because what it does is it gives you a channel of which you can have a direct connection with someone who, you've got their contact details, so they've already demonstrated to you that they have shown a willingness to engage with your business and your organization. So it already is a really quick channel of which to effectively communicate. And then also, some CRM systems are really expensive and complex, and avoid them until you really need them. But there is a lot of kind of cost-effective ways in which you can actually quickly ignite email marketing. But the reason why I like email marketing so much is that as I've said, like it's a regular channel through which you can connect. It gives you a canvas in which you can actually put down your thoughts and your ideas and your thinking around a particular issue, which, you know, I said before is really important to create that connection between you and the customer. But also it allows you to gain insight over time of what issues and topics in terms of the content you're putting out there are people engaging with the most, what are they not engaging with, and it allows you to build a picture of, right, okay, I know that if I want to get a few more people interested and engaged, I need to focus on this. Like, you know, and I've seen in the past numerous times, whenever you do a direct call to action email, you know, you will get great results, but actually when you put out a piece of thought leadership content, I've actually more often than not seen more people clicking on that content and clicking through into our client's ecosystem. The other benefit of email marketing is that you are, to my point, literally just then you are bringing them into your world. And if you can send out an email and get people to come and engage with a piece of content that's sitting with you in your website, that is so much more useful for you as well, because if you set up your website correctly, then, you know, you could be then serving them ads through retargeting, be that through paid social, or even through, if you've got a little bit of extra budget, through kind of display media as well. But what you're doing is ensuring that you are creating a few more touch points with your business and your customer just through one very, very simple channel. So, you know, I always say, and whilst it can be challenging to sit there and think, okay, every week, what do I need to be saying? What can I be saying? If you've really done all of that thinking up front in terms of who your audience is, what it is that they want to hear from a business like you, as well as to the point about understanding what problems and challenges they're facing and how you can solve them, that helps you build out a wealth of different content and different ways in which you can talk to them. And so just start thinking about that, and then it should quickly grow. And I get that a lot of people are time poor, but this is one way of spending one day a week where you can be sending something out, and people will also know that they're going to be receiving something from you on that day as well. And often they often do look forward to it. So for me, that is the simplest and easiest way to just get started and get going and get your contacts database engaged.
Brilliant, that's really useful, Gareth. James.
I was going to add to what Gareth said. I think email is a great way of getting started for sure, and nurturing your customers who have already shown an intent. What I was going to add to that was that there are some channels that naturally lend themselves better to some products over others, and knowing what products you're knowing what channel is best for your product is also a good way of focusing down in the early stages. So an example I'll give you is like watchfinder.co.uk. They sell they're like a marketplace. They sell secondhand watches. People sell it to them and they sell it on. I think they know that they've got access to all these watches, so they do YouTube reviews of these amazing watches that most people don't have access to, and they get 500,000, 1 million views, huge amount of views for a YouTube content channel. It could be quite easy. They could have gone, okay, we're going to make a content hub about, and we're going to write 5 articles on how to select a wristwatch, but they were, we're going to focus on YouTube, and we're going to show off what we've got, like our product, which is this idea of being able to access second market watches on the secondary market, and use that as our hook, and we're going to focus and double down on that. That's not going to work for, say, a tech SaaS product. Their thought leadership, email marketing, communicating the idea that drives why you need that tool is going to be a lot more effective. So maybe YouTube's not going to be the channel for you. If it's very photogenic, then Instagram might be a better channel to explore, or even TikTok perhaps. I think, especially when you're starting out and you're a small and medium-sized business, it's very, very easy to be like, okay, right, we need to have an SEO program, we need to have a content hub, we need to be on all these social channels, we need to have a performance marketing person doing all this, and we need to have a press agency, and then you're spread too thin. I think focusing on a few things that don't cost you, such as email, CRM, and 1 or 2 channels where you're pushing it out to new top of funnel potential customers, and just going, how do we make this work? Like, how do we make this really exciting and engaging? And we'll come to all the other stuff when we come to it, is a very good way of getting traction initially. And then if you start to see results, then putting paid behind it can help accelerate that even further.
Thanks, James.
I was going to comment as well, just on that paid piece. A good segue there. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think going back to Gareth's point about the database, you can also, if you're going to use, if it's a B2B offering and you're going on LinkedIn, or if it's, if you're using Facebook or one of the other social channels, is being able to kind of load in that database of contacts, and then you can create those lookalike audiences, so you can reach more people like the people in your database, and that's can be another cost-effective way to grow your reach and get out there with those brand messages, so that you can start to get that air cover, lay that groundwork, so that people know who you are when they and they're seeing your messages on their emails, and they also getting those retargeting ads and seeing you in those paid social environments as well. So it's kind of that build as you start to get that traction, and you've got a small campaign that you can, and messaging that you can proactively go out there with and test with those growth audiences.
Another question, which is a little bit how long's a piece of string, but maybe it's quite a big question, but maybe for another time. But thinking about technology, so we talked about email marketing. Gareth, you'd mentioned about getting the structure of your website, so capturing meaningful data so you can retarget. As a panel, have any top tips in terms of that technology that can help with automation, efficiency, to really, I suppose, ultimately with an aim of keeping costs? So thinking about what one of our panelists has asked, keeping costs low, being mindful of budget, but at the same time, ultimately driving scale. James.
I think for sure exploring, if you have a very small distribution budget and you want to make it go a long way, then you do want to minimize the amount that you can spend on creative, but the creative still be effective. Artificial intelligence tools are becoming very, very good to do this quickly and efficiently, especially if you have some very experimental people within the team who are willing to spend a bit of time to learn them. I was given a sort of a brainstorm idea recently of there was a very limited budget. How do you make radio work when actually radio voiceovers were going to eat into the distribution budget? And the tool they were promoting was an AI tool. It was like, well, actually, let's use an AI voice and say that it's an AI voice to and that this is the first radio commercial voiced in AI to make that advertising sell. And that meant that effectively what would have been a few £1,000 perhaps for the rights and after the recording studio and all that became £30. Is it as good in like at the moment as a human voice? No, you can't transplant it just willy-nilly, but you can be very tactical about how you use those ideas. So for instance, there's voice ones, there's Midjourney for images, there's Runway for video now. People who want to experiment can find ways of being creative. I will say that this is not just technology dependent, though. You can be creative without technology for sure. You can handwrite something, and that lo-fi ad of something that's handwritten is distinctive because nobody does it anymore. But looking at those tools, especially AI tools, is a great way of helping your performance get better creative for a cheaper cost.
Thanks. Gareth, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I was actually going to say something similar, because I think particularly if you are under pressure in terms of needing to produce a lot of content, I have found that ChatGPT has been a great tool for doing some initial drafts of stuff. I think AI is going to be an amazing tool for marketeers in the future, but I do think right now it requires a lot of human intervention in order to ensure that there is a level of truth, is probably that's the right word there, but in terms of ensuring that you're not just don't trust AI completely, but use it as a way of cutting down the time to market in terms of producing a lot of content, but always be mindful that if you're using ChatGPT in particular in the context of what I've said before to help you produce a lot of, be that social posts or email copy, you've got to spend time going through it to make sure that what it's saying is in line with what you're doing and that it's not gone rogue through whatever it's taught itself on. So I do find that that's really, really useful. I also think there's just a load of other interesting tools out there that beyond that, like tapping into free search insights, or even some of the insights that are available to you just by having a social media profile and setting up as a business profile. You know, you get access to a lot of the insight tools there that provide you audience data into what people prefer and what people like. So the combination of creating a combination of a few different tools, giving you the insight in terms of what to inform the content, then using tools like AI to then produce the content, it's really is useful. And look, to be honest with you, I've also even asked AI to show me some of the biggest trends or to mine data as well, and it has actually come up with some fairly decent results. So I would just say, like, also go with what you're comfortable with and what you have time to spend and invest in, because then you can become too reliant on something, and that's when things fall through the cracks. But yeah, I you know, AI has got huge potential for this space. It really does.
Brilliant. Dan?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I was also going to say, I mean, I think especially for small teams that are pressed for time, and if they do have a high, you know, a high demand for content, or even just thinking about what could we be writing about, what thought leadership topics could be useful and interesting, you know, it's really useful to just pose those questions into ChatGPT, or even try some of the different generative AI engines to see what kind of different answers you get. But I think from a, you know, but for me in the testing that I've done, it's very much, and there's a lot of talk about the prompts that you're using to get the results out of AI, and asking the AI to, you know, think like they're, you know, like they're part of the business, and you need them to write a social media post on X, and what the tone of being specific about what the tone of voice is that you're looking for, and how short or long you need it to be, etc. And really trying to hone that down. I've found that, you know, you can rarely use it, you know, carte blanche, you know, without any edits. So, you know, you do have to still have a clever marketer who can, you know, really be that brand guardian, that arbiter of the tone of voice, and ultimately what you want to convey. But I think if you're trying to crank out content, it's a really great way of just getting those starting points. And sometimes you can do some light touch editing. I've even seen, you know, use of humor in ChatGPT based on tone of voice prompts that I've given, and it's worked out really well, you know. So that's been really impressive to see, and it seems like it's continuously getting better and learning as it you know, as you know, as the new generations of it are being released. So definitely worth testing, and I think most marketeers are already using ChatGPT in some form or another.
Well, thank you all of you. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I think, you know, some key takeaways for me has been really about, you know, thinking about your value, thinking about your mission, obviously the importance of brand in terms of actually that long-term building a reputation, but I think likewise understanding your audiences, your customers' pain points, and actually communicating effective solutions. And I think technology is really exciting, and I think is obviously creating lots of opportunities for automation. So thank you again to Gareth Davies and James Maddison and Diane Perlman. There will be a write-up and a recording, so we will share that with everyone. And actually our last discussion leading on from that is that obviously if you enjoyed today's discussion, on the 6th of September, which is going to be our next event, we've got a practical masterclass, which is on creating brand assets and creative content using AI. So just what we've all been talking about. Is going to be led by Ivan Weightman. So yes, there's a little bit of nepotism there. So Ivan is co-founder and owner of Worstonbury Vineyard and Apparel, but he'll be bringing his creative expertise as a concept designer, an art director, working on films such as Men in Black, Avengers, Gravity, and Beauty and the Beast, and many, many more. So you can access that event on our website. But again, thank you to our incredible panel, and thank you for everyone who joined us today. Goodbye.